Well, howdy, friends. Here we go. Do me a favor and smack that thumbs up and tickle the follow button. Leave a comment if you're so inclined. Let's get going with Rebel Spurs, Part 5 by Andre Norton. Saddle up. Let's get ready to ride. Sure, but there ain't no order given what says a man has to stand up and be shot, and he don't shoot back. No, I ain't sniffing up trouble's hot trail like a bushhound. But neither am I gonna sit down, fold my two hands together when trouble hits it like it's likely to do out here. True agreed with that, though he did not say so. Rennie must know the circumstances. They'd have to defend himself if it came to a fight. But he could hope that, if Kitchell had stalked some hidden canyons with stolen horses, the outlaw leader had left no guards on duty thereabouts. With Running Fox prowling ahead, and with him and Ants using all the scout tricks they had learned in wartime, they should be able to learn just how correct Teodoro's suspicions were. Si, senors, the land lies so. Hilario Trinfran's crooked body pulled together in a lopsided perch as he squatted range fashion beside the morning campfire. He had smoothed the space of ground with his two hands and was setting out twigs and stones to create a miniature relief map of the countryside. Here is the waterhole to which the Pinto comes. Above that, we were moving from the side. To do so, we crossed here, a black-trimmed nail stabbed into the dust. It's then we see the tracks, 5 ahead, all shod horses, but not ridden, save for one. Apaches could have been running 'em, True commented. No, Trinfan shook his head. This far from pursuit, the Apaches would not have moved so. The Indio, he eats horseflesh. There would have been signs of a fire, or one of the animals cut down. These horses were being moved with care, not pushed too hard. We trailed them onto here. Hilario stabbed his finger into the dust again. Then, Teodoro. Now, tell them what you saw. The younger mustanger hung over the crude map. I climbed, senors. Up over the rocks. It is bad, that ground, high and steep, but with care one can reach a ledge, and along that one can go to look down into the next canyon. A good place for horses. There is water and grass. I stayed there watching the glasses. Don Cazar gave my father the glasses which bring the far close. There were poles set up in the rocks through which he brought those horses, making it like a pen we build for wild ones, but those in it were not wild. How many and what brands? Ants wanted to know. Teodoro shrugged. There are many trees, rocks. One cannot see everywhere. I counted 20 head. There is room for one more. As to brands, even the glasses could not make out plain to the eyes of what lying above. But there is no other ranchero who would run horses on the range, and Don Cazar's manadas are not driven in here. Does he want the wild ones to run off his mares? Horses would be kept so for only one reason, that they must be hidden, and in such a place as we found, they could be left for maybe a month or more. Don Cazar's riders do not patrol this far away from the stronghold. Had it not been that the Pinto causes so much trouble, even we would not be there. What about the Pinto? If he's all you say, wouldn't he try to get at this band? Asked Drew. No reason if they are saddle stock, no mares among them, Ant said thoughtfully. But would those hombres who put 'em there just leave no guards or nothing? That is what we do not know, Hilario replied. We took every precaution against being seen when Teodoro climbed to look into the canyon. and this I believe we were not suspected, if there was any watcher. Otherwise, senors, we would not have been alive to greet you when you rode in last night. This Quicho, he is like an Apache, here, there, everywhere. Today I am easier because you have brought the Pima, because we have 2 more guns in the camp. Why didn't you pull out yourselves? Ants asked. Because we were watched. That would have made our discovery as plain as if we stood out in the open and shouted to the winds. For 3 days before we found that trail, we had been building a pen for wild ones, casting about for the tracks runs of the Pinto's band. Having done so, we would not leave without completing our drive. And should those out there suspect, Trenford shook his head, we would not have lived to reach the stronghold, and that is the truth. This is also truth, Padre. Paquita came to the fire and picked up the coffee pot, pouring the thick black liquid into a waiting line of tin cups. It's time for us to be finished and be on the move, not to just talk of what must be done. Drew looked up in surprise. The girl was wearing breeches, ready to ride. In addition, instead of the gun belts, which all the men wore as a matter of course, Paquita had tucked a pair of derringers in the front of her sash belt. Their small grip showed above the faded silk folds. She is going with us? The Kentuckian asked, as the girl kicked dust over the campfire and stowed the empty pot in a cart. Ain't that dangerous for her? Hilario got to his feet with a lurch that made his crippled state only too plain. Senor, to hunt the wild ones is dangerous. You see me, twisted like a root, no? Not all straight as a man should be. This was done by wild ones. In one small moment, when I was not quick enough. Among us, the Mustangers, it is often daughters who are the best riders. They are quick, eager, riding lighter than their brothers or their fathers. And to do some, it is a loved life. With Paquita, that is true. As for danger, is that not always with us? In war, danger is a thing which one man makes for another. In this country, the land itself fights a man, war or no war. Cloudburst fills an arroyo with a flood without warning, and a man is drowned amidst the desert sand where only hours before he could have died for lack of that same water. There is a fall of rocks, a fall of horse, stampede of cattle, sickness which strikes at a lone traveler out of nowhere. Yet have you not ridden to war and come now to live in this land? See, we have danger, but a man can also die in his bed in the midst of a village with strong walls, and to everyone his own way of life. Now we ride. They indeed ride, following a trail which, as far as Drew could see, existed only in the minds of mustangers. But the 3 Mexicans swung along so confidently that he and Ants joined without question or argument. At a distance, they circled the waiting pen with walls of entwined brush and saplings, ready to funnel driven horses into the blind canyon. The Pinto's band must be located somehow, shaken out of the rocky territory their wily leader favored, before that drive could even begin. Water, Trinfan said, would be the key. Horses must drink, and they were creatures of habit, never ranging far from some one hole they had made their own. Trinfan blankets already flapped about the Pinto's chosen spring. They had seen the horses approach several times in the past, 2 days, and shy away from those flapping things with fearsome man scent. As long as La Bruja is with them, Paquita said, coming up beside Drew, they will not come. La Bruja? The witch, as Anglos would say. We call her so because of her cunning. She is the wise one who keeps lookout. I say she is possessed by the evil one. It is possible the Pinto is her son. Together they have always outwitted the hunters. But La Bruja is old. She runs more stiffly. Last time in the chase she began to drop behind. She is of no use, only a nuisance. It is the white one I wish to drop the rope over. The white one? Si, she is Nieve. the snow of the upper mountains. Among our people you will hear many tales of white ones without a dark spot on them, the ghost stallions that run the plains and no man may lay rope over. But this mare is the truth, and some day her eyes shone, and she seemed to be making some vow Drew would be called to bear witness to. Some day she'll be mine, not to trail south and sell, no, but to keep always. She must be very beautiful, he commented. It's not only that, senor. You have a fine horse, one which beat Don Cazar's Oro. Is that not so? Yes, Shiloh. And to you that one is above all other horses. If you lost him, you would be like hungry inside. Is that not also true? Yes. Her earnestness triggered that instant response from him. So, it is with me since I have seen Nieve. Men find such a horse. For years they follow the band in which it runs to snare it. They will suffer broken bones, as did my father, and hunger and thirst, because there is one tossing head, one set of flying heels before them. Sometimes they are lucky and they catch that one. If they do not, there is in them a pinch of winter, even when the desert sun is hot. Once I loved all horses. Now there is this one which I must have. Well, I hope you get her. Senor, last season I hoped. This season, I have belief that my hopes will come true. Ah, look, the Indio. She pointed with quirt, and Drew glanced left. He saw what appeared to be an outcrop of rock, and many others move, then rise on sturdy legs to meet them. Running Fox, a brown blanket twisted over one shoulder, the rest of him stripped down to breechcloth and moccasins, padded up to Hilario Trinfan, spoke in the guttural Pima. The Mustang translated. The horses are still there, but there is a camp of 2 men on the north slope above the canyon. Both men are Anglos. They are armed with rifles and take turns watching. Can we reach the place from where we can read the brands on the horses? Drew asked. Trinfan questioned the Pima. See, but you cannot go there by day. You must go in at dusk, wait out the night, and then see what you could in the early morning. Leave before sunup. Otherwise, the watchers may be able to locate you, he says. Trinfan smiled. That he could go at high noon and would not be seen, but for a white man it's a different matter. Waste a whole day just waiting, Ants protested. Senor, when one balances time against death, then I would say time is the better choice, Hilario replied. But this day will not be wasted. If any watch us, as well as those horses, they will not see about our business, and we will have no doubt that we hunt wild horses, not stolen ones. So Drew and Ants joined the Mustangers hunting. To Ants, this was something he had done before. Drew remembered that the Texan had been working with just such a hunting party when his family had been wiped out by Comanches in '59. But to Drew it was a new experience, and he was deeply intrigued by what he saw and the reasons for such an action. All they sighted of the Pinto's now thoroughly thirsty band was the stud himself and a black mare, La Bruja. Looking down from a vantage point high on a rocky rim, and the hunters did not try and reach them, knowing that all wild horses would be long gone before they could reach that lookout. This is the 4th day. Hilario Trinfan sat his buckskin at the waterhole, watched Teodoro make careful adjustment of the blankets and he tied on the bushes. They'll be wild and with thirst. Tomorrow the blankets will be taken down. There will be no sign of man here. By mid-afternoon, the mares will be ready to fight past the Pinto for water. He could not hold them away. So they will come and drink too much. Perhaps he will come. If he does, Trinfan snapped his fingers, I shall be waiting with a rifle. We take no more chances with that one. Anyway, the mares will be heavy and slow with all the water in their bellies. They can be herded into our trap. Then we'll come. See, that one will come. No one can take these mares from him. He will be mad with rage, too angry to be any longer so cunning. We shall have him then, and there will be no more killings of studs here. At dusk, Running Fox slipped down to the camp, but not far enough into the circle of firelight to be sighted by any watcher in the night. Then Drew and Ants, he was off again. Within less than a quarter hour, Drew could have laughed wearily at his past satisfaction in his prowess as a scout, compared to this flitting shadow. He was a brush bull crashing through the brush. Ants was better, much better, but even he was far below the standard set by the Pima. The trio climbed, crept, and crouched for long moments, waiting for Drew knew not what, some sound, some scent, some sight in the night, which Running Fox could accept as assurance of temporary safety. The Kentuckian had no idea how long it took them to reach the perch into which they last pushed. A breastwork of rock was before them. The half-circle of shallow cave, cut-off portion of the star-pointed sky above. Stay here, the two words were grunted at them out of the dark. Then nothing. Running Fox had vanished in a way which could make a man believe they had been escorted not by a living Pima, but by a ghost from that long-forgotten race which had left their houses scattered in the canyon niches up and down this country. It was cold, even though half-cave shielded most of the wind. Drew unrolled the blanket he had carried tied about him and squeezed down beside Ants. Their combined body warmth ought to keep them fairly comfortable. Drew doubled his hands inside the coat, wriggling his gloved fingers to keep them from stiffening. Sure do wish there was some way a fella could bring him a little invisible fire along on this trip like this. Ain't gonna be what I'd name right out as a comfortable night. Never seems to be an easy way to do a hard thing, Drew assented. He hugged himself, his hands slipped back and forth about his waist under his two shirts. He had added the second before he left the stronghold. The band of his money belt made a lump, and now his hands ran along it. He had no occasion to open any of those pockets since he left Tubacca the first time. Now, to take his mind off the immediate discomfort, he tried to estimate by touch alone how many coins still remained in the two pockets. The middle section of the three divisions held his papers. There were those for the horses, the parole he had brought from Gainesville, the two letters he had not been able to bring himself to deliver to Hunt Rennie. One was from Cousin Mary, and the other was a formal, close to legal statement drawn up by Uncle Forbes' attorney. Both were intended to prove the identity of one Drew Rennie beyond any reasonable doubt. Drew's fingers stilled above the pocket. It felt too thick, bunchy under his pinching. Whatever. He squirmed around, freed the blanket, and began to pull off his glove. "What's the matter?" the Texan began to whisper. "Just a minute." It was clumsy business, pulling the belt free from under his layers of heavy clothing. But Drew got it across his knee, his chill's fingers picked at the fastening of the pocket. There was no pocket of papers there, neither the sheets for the horse, nor the much-creased strip of the parole, nor the sealed envelope which had both letters. Instead, he plucked out what felt like shreds of grass and leaves and crackling. "What is it?" Ants leaned forward. "My papers. They're gone." Drew rummaged frantically, turning the pocket inside out. "Who? What papers, compadre?" Drew explained. "You've been wearing that belt constantly, ain't you?" "Yes, except," and then he suddenly tensed. "That night down by the swimming hole when you thought you saw something in the bushes, remember?" "I remember. Looky here, who'd want 'em and why?" "Shannon." And in that moment, Drew was as certain as if he had actually seen Johnny stripping them out of the belt. "How'd he know you were carrying anything?" "He knew I had the belt. I left it with Topman when I raised Shiloh, and he saw me give it to him. And Ants, he must have heard all you call me Rennie and the Jacks. If he did, he'd want to find out more. Rennie's not a common name, and Shannon's not stupid. He'd figure anything value I'd be carrying would be in this belt." "How come you didn't know it was gone?" I don't know. Seemed just as heavy, and that pocket didn't ride any different when I had it on. No reason to open it lately. So what he's got? Your hoss papers, your parole out of the army, and them 2 letters? Yeah. He's got just about all he needs to make one big war smoke for you. And I can't prove he has them, Drew said bleakly. Just by making him one little private fire, Ance went on. He could about put you out of business, compadre. It's only one thing to do. Such as? Johnny Shannon has gone do some talk in his own cell, and we can't wait too long to invite him to a chin-wagging party neither. Ance was right. Shannon had only to slip that collection of papers into the nearest fire and he'd be put to an end of Drew Rennie. Of course, Drew could obtain duplicates of the letters and horse papers from Kentucky, but that might take months, and he did not know whether the parole could reissue from Army orders. Why, at this moment he could not prove that he had served in the East with the Army of Tennessee. Let Bayless come down on him now, and he was defenseless. We can't ride tonight, Ance added, but come first light, we give a look-see here, then we can move straight back to the stronghold in Shannon. Also, I'm saying this because I think it's good advice, Drew. Now's the time. You've got to go to the old man, tell him the truth quick as you can. Sure, I know why you didn't want to claim Kim before, but now you have to. Drew shook his head. Not now, not with nothing to back up my story. Shannon could give me a lie direct. I'm thinking you're showing less brains than a dumb cow critter, amigo, but listen, I'm back in your play. Does Shannon cut up rough? He's got 2 of us hitching a holster steady and getting ready to loose lead. No, I'm not going to drag you in. Yeah, and I mean yeah. We joined trails a long time back by that there mill pond in Kentucky, and we ain't splitting now. If a storm's walking up on us slow or coming up fast with its tail up, it's going to be both of us getting under or out together. Drew put on the belt again. His impatience bit at him. But what Ance said made sense. They had been sent here to do a job, and in the morning they'd do it. Then they could ride back to the stronghold. How he was going to handle Shannon he had no idea, but he would have to be sure. The first light was a gray rim around the world as they lay flat, training the glasses Hilario had loaned them on 2 horses grazing not too far below. Well, that's it. U.S. big and plain as the paint on a Comanche's face, and almost as ugly. Them's army mounts, and I don't see no troopers hereabouts, Ance said. Running Fox materialized in ghostly fashion, and they retracted at better speed and less effort down the path which had brought them to the canyon perch. Just as they were about to top the ridge behind the Mustang camp, Pima held up a warning hand. Long knives. Troopers. They went to their knees and made stealthy crawl to the crest of the ridge. There were troopers down there, all right. The trin fans sat on their saddles, while an officer walked up and down before him. Running Fox put a finger on Drew's arm and motioned to the left. The horses of the Mustanger were browsing in a small dell, their tight hobbles unloosed. Together the trio moved in that direction. The Pima slipped ahead with the speed and efficiency of motion his companions envied. He had the 2 nearest horses in hand, leading them towards the bushes. Looks like we ride bareback, Ance caught at Hackamore and then mounted. Move, Drew waved Running Fox to the other horses. We can't wait to get another horse. You ride for the stronghold, make it straight to Rennie, and report. I'm staying here. I can say we're fired, and Trinfan took me on as a hand. Anson was the better rider under these circumstances, and the better scout. To wait to pick up a 3rd horse was folly. What about Shannon? Shannon'll have to wait. Drew slapped the Texan's horse. It reared and then pounded off. Drew turned to walk back to the camp. He rounded the end of the ridge and stopped short. The round and deadly mouth of an army Colt was pointed straight at his middle, covering the disastrously empty pocket of his money belt. A lantern provided a very small smoky light on the table of the 3 boards mounted on boxes. If the furniture was makeshift, the walls of the room were not. Logs and adobe were just as effective for the purpose of confinement as stone blocks. Drew sat up on the bunk shell of a board holding straw and rested his head between his hands. He could not follow the action which had brought him here, trace it back to almost minute by minute over the past 3 days. How he'd come here was plain enough. Why was another matter. Lieutenant Spath, back in the Mustangers' camp, might have accepted the Kentuckian's story, or he might at least been uncertain enough not to arrest him, if only Trooper Stevens had not been the one on patrol. Once before, Stevens had been most vocal about Rebs who were too free with their fists. Spath's trooper guard, reporting the escape of Running Fox and Ants, had condemned his captive fully as far as the lieutenant was concerned. The troopers had then searched their prisoner, and to them a loaded money belt worn by a drifter did not make good sense, either unless too much sense on the wrong side of the ledger. Drearily, Drew had to admit that he had stood in the lieutenant's boots. He would have made exactly the same decision and brought his prisoner back to camp. So, here he was now, just where Bayless had promised to see him, in any Army detention cell with no proof of identity and circumstantial evidence against him piling up by the minute. All they needed was some definite proof to tie him to Kitchell, and he was lost. He had to pin his hope on Ants and Don Cazar. Drew ground his boot heel into the dirt floor. That was just what he had sworn he would never do, call upon Rennie for help, especially now since troopers had discovered those Army-branded horses back in the canyon, and Bayless would try to use that against Rennie. Ance's escape had been a short-sighted solution, Drew knew. To the captain, such an action only tied the range in deeper. The Kentuckian ran his fingers through his hair, trying to think of something which had not gone wrong. The plank door banged open, and Drew's head came up with a snap. No use letting those Yankees think they had him worried. The lantern, feeble as it was, picked the stripes on the blouse of the first man, the tin plate in the hands for the second. Drew looked down his plate, and it was slid under the bars and across the floor of his cell. "Stew, Sergeant? Ain't that overfeeding?" Thought bread and water was more the captain's styles for Reb prisoners. Drew was pleased that he was able to sound unconcerned. "Cocky one, ain't you?" asked the man who brought the plate. "All you Rebs is alike, never know when you're licked." "Get along, Farley, that's enough," Muller broke in. Drew picked up the plate and forced himself to spoon up its contents. Stuff was still warm and not too bad. After the second spoonful, he discovered that he was hungry. That much he would not have to pretend. "Kid," Sergeant Muller's bulk shot most of the lantern glow out of the cell. "You young squirts all alike. Never take no advice, but I'm going to give it anyway. When a captain sees you button your lip, he ain't one takes kindly to smart talking, especially not from a prisoner. As far as he's concerned, he's got you about dead to rights, hoss thieving from the Army." "I'd like to know what proof he has," Drew returned sharply. "Your patrol picked me up well away from those horses in the Mustanger camp where I was working, and Captain Bayless can't prove that's not true either. Anyway, what difference does it make to you, Sergeant?" "Since you ask, I don't rightly know, kid. Maybe you was spoiling for a fight in the Jacks and did push your boys." "But you didn't think so, Sergeant." Drew put the plate on the bunk and stood up to approach the bars. Muller was taller. The Kentuckian had to raise his eyes to meet the sergeant's. Trooper's face was mostly in the shadow, but it was plain the man did not mean him any ill. "I got my reasons." Muller did not make any straighter answer. "But you think of what the captain does know about you, kid. You go riding around with gold on you, more money than any drifter ever sees in 10 years or more. You're caught near where some stolen Army stock is stashed away, and your partner lights out, hell-bent for leather, breaking through Army lines. And we only got your story as to who really are. I ask you, does that read good in the lieutenant's report when the captain gets it?" "No," Drew answered. "But do you suggest doing about it, Sergeant?" "Got anybody in town as will speak up for you, Kirby?" "Reese Topman, he did before." He doesn't know any more than what he said right then. Trouble is, Sergeant, anybody I could ask to back me up, I'd have to bring out from Kentucky, and I don't believe Captain Bayless would wait for that. You work for Rennie, don't you? Hunt Rennie's got nothing to do with this. He didn't know those horses were on the range. Because you put them there, Kirby? Muller made a lightning-about face. He snapped to attention, facing the captain. And what are you doing here, Sergeant? Prisoner being fed, sir, Muller reported stolidly. And there's no need for conversation. Dismissed, Sergeant. Captain watched Muller leave before he turned once more to Drew. Kirby, do you know the penalty for horse stealing in this country? He snapped. Yes. Then you must just what you have to face. Captain Drew began slowly, wanting to make his words just right. There was no reason to let Bayless think he could simply ride over his prisoner. On the other hand, Muller's advice had been good. It would be dangerous to antagonize the officer. I had nothing to do with those stolen horses. We found them, yes, but they were already in the canyon, and there were 2 men guarding them up on the ridge. They must have cleared out when your patrol rode in. But they were there the night before. You saw them? No, our scout did. What scout? That Indian who got away with your partner? I heard rumors that Kitchell had links with Bronco Apaches, but I didn't believe any white man could stoop so low. That Indian, Drew felt as if he were walking a very narrow mountain ledge in the dark with a drop straight down the middle of the world on both sides, was a Pima, one of the Stronghold scouts. So, Hunt Rennie did know about those horses, Bayless pounced. He did not. He sent us to the Mustanger camp with a message, and Pima rode scout for us. It's regular order on the range. Take one of the Pimas if you're going any distance from where you can ford up. You can find out that's true easy enough. Drew was striving to keep a reasonable tone to find an answer which must pierce through Bayless' rancor. After all, Bayless could not have held his present rank and station so long and been all hot-headed plunger. What was this so important message Rennie had to deliver to a camp of Mustangers? Bayless bored in. Even in the lantern's restricted light, Drew could see the flush darkening of the other's face. They were having trouble with a wild stud, a killer. Mr. Rennie wants him killed quick. He sent 2 of us out to help, thought with more hands it could be done. Kirby, Bayless' fists were on his hips, his head pushed forward from his shoulders until his sun-peeled face was only inches away from the bars between them. Do I look like a stupid man? A man to be fed stories? You ride into town on a blooded stud with a mare of like breeding and a belt loaded down with gold. You give out that you served with Forrest, a looting guerrilla and a murdering butcher. You've heard of Fort Pillow. Kirby? That's what a decent man remember when anyone says Forrest in their hearing. Only you can't even prove you're one of that gang of raiders either, can you? No, I'll tell you just who and what you are. You're one of Kitchell's scavengers come into town with gold for supplies and a chance to contact people you want to meet. I've known for a long time that Topham, Rennie, and probably a dozen other so-called citizens that miserable outlaw's roosts are backing Kitchell. Now here's a chance to prove it. Not through me, you don't, Drew cut in. I'm just what I said I was from the beginning, Captain. You can't prove anything different. I don't have to prove it. You've convicted yourself, Kirby. You can't account for the gold you're carrying, and if you rode in with Forrest, where's your parole? You know you were told to carry it. I can deal with you just as any horse thief is dealt with. Well, I'll wager you can't even prove ownership of those horses you brought with you. Where are your sale papers? On the other hand, Kirby, if you do give us the evidence we need against Kitchell and those who are helping him, and the court might be moved to leniency. How old are you, 19, 20? Rather young to hang. Captain, I can prove everything I told you. In Kentucky, I have kin. They can't. Kentucky? Bayless snorted. Kentucky's far away, Kirby. Do you expect us to sit around waiting for some mythical kin of yours to appear from Kentucky with another set of lies to open this door? He pounded with one fist against the cell portal. I'm a reasonable man, Kirby, and I'm not asking too much. You know that. What are Kitchell, Rennie, Topman to you, and why are you willing to face a noose for 'em? Kitchell, I know nothing about except what I've heard, and that's not good. Drew sat down on the bunk partly because the chill which had crept down his back had poured into his legs, and they felt oddly weak under him. Reese Topman and Mr. Rennie, as far as I'm concerned, they're honest men. I don't think, Captain, that you can prove I'm not either. There is such a thing as overconfidence, Kirby, and it comes to the fore in your kind. But after you do some serious thinking, I believe you'll begin to see that this is one time you're not going to be able to lie and ride yourself out. He left without a backward glance. Drew picked up the plate, pushed the spoon back and forth through the congealing mess left on it. He could not choke down another mouthful. Just how much power did Bayless have? Could he try a civilian court-martial and get away with it? And to whom would Drew possibly appeal? Topham? Rennie? Apparently Bayless wanted them enough to suggest Drew testify against him. Did he actually believe Drew guilty? Or had he been subtle invitation to perjury? The Kentuckian set the plate on the floor and got up again to make minute study of the cell. His thought was now maybe his only chance would be to break out. But his first appraisal of detention quarters had been the right one, given a pickaxe and a shovel. And an uninterrupted period of, say, a week, he might be able to tunnel under one of the log walls. But otherwise, he could not see any other way of getting free, save to walk through a cell door. Drew threw himself on the bunk and tried to think logically and clearly, but his tired body went over by his mind, and he slept. "Hey, Kirby, wake up. There's someone here to see you." Drew reached for a Colt, which was no longer under his pillow, and then rolled over and sat up groggily, rubbing one hand across his smarting eyes. The lantern light had given way to dusty sunshine. One bar of now caught him straight across the face. "All right, Kirby, suppose you tell me what this is all about." Drew's head came up. His hand fell. Hunt Rennie and Lieutenant Spath stood side by side at the bars, or rather, not Hunt Rennie, but Don Cazar was there, for the first owner of the range was wearing the formal Spanish dress in which Drew had first seen him, and his expression was one of withdrawal. "They think I'm one of Kitchell's men, and I had something to do with those stolen horses we found on the range," he blurted out badly. "They also showed me about $600 in gold found on you," Rennie returned. "Thought you needed a job. You told Topman that, didn't you?" "Yes, sir." Drew's bewilderment grew stronger. Hunt Rennie sounded as if he believed part of Bayless' accusation. "That money's rightfully mine," Drew added. "You can prove it?" "Sure. Back in Kentucky," Drew paused. Back in Kentucky, proof would not help him here now in Arizona. Kentucky? Rennie's withdrawal appeared to increase by a score of miles. "I understood you were from Texas." "Told you, Rennie," the lieutenant said. "His story doesn't hold together at all. A couple of really good questions and it falls apart." "I came here from Texas." Drew took stiff hold of himself. He was walking that narrow ledge again, and with a wind ready to push him off into a bottomless gulf. "Rode with a wagon train as far as Santa Fe. From there, with a military supply wagons to Tucson. I was in Kentucky after the war, went home with a boy from my scout company." "Who gave you two-blooded horses and felt full of gold for a goodbye present?" scoffed Spath. "Have you any proof of what you say closer than Kentucky?" Rennie ignored the lieutenant's aside. "I can account for your time on the range, or most of it, but you have to answer for this money and where you came from originally. What about your surrender parole? I know you did have papers for the horses. Callie saw 'em. Produce those." "I can't." Drew's hands balled into fists when they rested on his knees. "Sure you can't. You never had any." "I had them. I don't have them now." What was the use of trying to tell Rennie about his suspicions of Shannon? And if Johnny had destroyed the papers as well as he might have, Drew could never make them believe him anyway. "Kirby, this is serious," said Rennie. "You ride in from nowhere with 2 fine horses wearing a brand you say is your own. You have more money than any drifter ever carries. You claim to be a Texan, and yet now you say all the proof of your identity is in Kentucky? And you're not Anson Kirby's cousin, are you?" That's the last question shot out so suddenly that Drew answered before he thought. "No." "I thought so," Rennie nodded. "Education is a polisher, but I don't think 3 or 4 years schooling would have made a Texas range rider ask for sherry over whiskey, except to experiment with an exotic beverage. There were other things, too, which did not fit the Kirby background once Anson turned up. Just who are you?" Drew shrugged. "It doesn't matter now. As the lieutenant and the captain bailiffs have pointed out, if my only proof is in Kentucky and out of reach." "Suppose you've heard of telegraphs?" Rennie's sarcasm was cold. "Communication with Kentucky is not so impossible as you appear to think. You give me a name and an address, or names and addresses, and I'll do the rest. All you have to do is substantiate background and your Army service, proving no possible contact with Kitchell. Then the captain will be forced to admit his mistake. Give Hunt Rennie the name of Cousin Meredith Barrett, of Aunt Mariana's husband, Major Forbes, the addresses of Red Springs or Oak Hill." Drew could not, while there was a chance that Ants might find the papers or make Johnny Shannon admit to taking them. The Kentuckian could not tell Hunt Rennie who he was here and now. "I want to talk to Ants," he said out of his own thoughts. "I've got to talk to Ants." "He's gone." Rennie's 2 words did not make sense at first. When they did, Drew jumped up and caught at the bars. "Gone where?" "Cleared out. Got clean away." Again, Spath supplied the information. "Or so they tell us. He went back to the stronghold after he broke through our lines, but when our patrol rode down to get him, he was gone." "Why?" Drew asked. "Why pick him up?" "Why? Because he's in this too," Spath retorted. "Probably rode straight to Kitchell's hideout. Now, Mr. Rennie, time's up. The captain authorized this visit because he thought you might get something out of the prisoner. Well, you did, in a mission that he's been passing under a false name. We know what he is, a renegade and a horse thief." Drew was no longer completely aware of either man, but as Rennie turned away, he broke through the mist of confusion which seemed to be enclosing him more tightly than the walls of the cell. "Shannon, where's Shannon?" Hunt Rennie's head swung around. "What about Johnny?" he demanded. "He took my papers out of my belt. It's probably the worst thing he could do, to accuse Johnny Shannon without proof." "What papers, and why should he want them?" Rennie had been remote before. Now he was as chill as the Texas Northers Ants had joked about. "The parole, the horse papers, some letters. You saw him take them? You know why he should want them?" Drew shook his head once. He could not answer the second question now. "Then how'd you know Johnny took them?" How'd he know? Drew could give no same reason for his conviction that it had been Johnny's fingers which had looted the pocket of papers and stuffed it with leaves and grass in their place. "You'll have to do better than that, kid," Spath laughed. "You must have known Shannon was gone, too. By the time he's back from Mexico, he won't need to prove that's a lie." Drew disregarded Lieutenant's comments. Rennie was the one who mattered. And in the moment, the Kentuckian knew that he had made a fatal mistake. Why he hadn't to agree to telegraph Kentucky, now there was no hope. As far as Don Canzar was concerned, one Drew Kirby could be written off the list. Drew had made an enemy of the very person he most wanted to convince. The Kentuckian swung around and walked to the one small cell barred window through which he could see the sun. He walked blindly, trying not to hear those spurred boots moving out the door going away. 3 good strides one way, 4 another to measure the cell. Morning sun gone by noon, daylight outside the window becoming dusk in turn. They fed him army rations, delivered under guard, and the guard never spoke. There was no asking questions, and Drew had none left to ask anyway. Except by the morning of the second day after Rennie's visit, his wonder grew. Why was Bayless delaying a formal charge against him? This wait could mean the captain was not finding it so easy to prove he really did have a renegade horse thief in custody. But Drew knew he must pin no hopes on a thread that fine. What had happened to Ance and Shannon? Gone to Mexico? He must have ridden back with the colonel. Drew could expect nothing more from Rennie or Topman or the trim fans. Spath had marched them back too, along with his prisoner, but this lieutenant had not had them under arrest. The Mustangers were all well known in this district and could prove their reason for being there when they were found. And Kitchell had raided one of the corrals last season, so they had no possible tie with the elusive outlaw. Probably by now the trim fans had returned to their hunt for the Pinto. No, there was no use thinking that anyone was going to get out of this. No one but himself, and he had bungled that so far. Drew, his body tired with pacing the small cell, flung himself down on the bunk and listened to the sounds of the camp. He had pretty well worked out the routine by those sounds. The camp itself was a makeshift affair, its core of which was this cell was a part. It was an old ranch building. There were tents and a few lean-tos on a plateau bounded on the east by a ravine, on the west by a creek bottom. Huts of stone and rawhide planks served as officer quarters. In fact, it was no more a fort than the bivouacs he had known during the war. Fortunately, this room was the most substantial part. If he could get out and pick up his horses, then perhaps he could head for Mexico. There was a war down there. A soldier could find an anonymous refuge in a foreign army. Shelby's whole Confederate command had crossed the Rio Grande to do just that. That part was easy. To get out of here, that was what he could not accomplish. Two men always came together when they fed him, and they didn't open the cell door, just pushed the plate through. Sentry was on duty outside. Drew could beat time to the sound of those footfalls day and night. And suppose he did get free of the cell, he would have to grab a horse and supplies and arms. Drew rolled over on the cot and buried his face in his folded arms. Might as well try to get out of here by using willpower alone to turn locks. They left the lantern burning all night to keep a light on him, and the sentry looked in the peephole every time he passed. The Kentuckian did not know just when it was that he became conscious of the noise overhead. Lizards, maybe even rats, could move about the beams hidden by the age-brown manta strips. But surely this was too late in the season for a lizard to be so lively by night. The temperature dropped with the rapidity of a weight-plunging earthward and rats aloft. Drew did not change his position on the bunk, but his body tensed. No rat would stay in one place, gnawing with such purpose and concentration at a spot in the darkest corner of a cell roof. Ants? How or why the Texan could be at work there, Drew did not know, but there was a stealthy attempt being made to reach him from above. He was now sure. His teeth closed on his wrist as he lay listening to that scratching above and to the irregular advance and retreat of the sentry. He heard the man pause by the door and knew he was under inspection. Well, let that Yankee look. He'd see his prisoner peacefully sleeping. Now the trooper was moving on. The noise from above became sharper, and there was a slight crackle. The linen in the roofing sagged under the burden, and Drew caught his breath in a gasp. Miraculously, the yellow cloth supported the object, a bulge as big as a saddlebag. A portion of the roof had given way. The scratching, which had been still, began again. Then the bulge was gone, pulled away from above. Dust sprinkled down from the disturbed manta. In the next instant, Drew moved. Using his hands on either side of his body, he raked up the straw which filled the box bunk. In a swift moment, timed the sentries passing to the farthest point from the spy hole, the Kentuckian rolled to the floor, slapped and pulled the blanket into place over the mounded straw. Not too good. It certainly would not fool any inspection within the room, but in the lantern light and this far from the door, the improvised dummy might just satisfy the glance of the sentry for some precious seconds. Drew was across the cell, flattened against the wall under the still quivering strip of material. More bulges appeared and disappeared, fragments fallen and retrieved. Then a sharp point pierced down with the tip of the knife, slitting through the tough stuff. A slash, and the manta peeled back against the wall of the cell. "Senor?" It was so faint whispered, Drew hardly caught it. "Yes." He looked up with desperate eagerness into what he hoped to see the dark splotch of a hole. A rawhide lariat, smoothly braided, oiled into supple silkiness, dangled through. Drew got his hands on it, pulled it back against the wall as the sentry returned. He held his breath during the pause outside that spy hole, pause which lengthened alarmingly. Then his body jerked in answer to the sound a half-second before he realized what manner of sound. The sentry had sneezed and sniffled too, loudly. Then he went on to complete his beat. The blanket and the straw, they had worked. Drew pulled at the lariat. He was answered by a return jerk. He jumped and began to climb. Then with a wrench he was through the hole. Other hands helped to pull. "Come, pronto." The hands were pushing, urging. He wriggled forward. Teodoro Trinfan, but why? There was no time to ask. Drew could only obey directions. They made a worm's progress along the full length of the old ranch building, dropped the lariat for a ladder to the ground, and they crossed a small part of the camp near the ravine with same caution they used on the roof. "Senor," Teodoro's lips were at Drew's ear as the boy pressed against him in the thin cover of a shadow. "Left, a big stone. Put your hands on it. Swing about and down." Drew had to take that on blind trust. He had no idea what kind of drop waited below, and only by firm willpower did he follow orders. But his boot soles met with a solid surface. Then he was caught about the waist, and Hilario's voice whispered to him, "Senor, you stand so." Hands fumbled about him, looping him with supporting lariat. "Now, we go. Your hand, senor." Drew's left hand was caught in a tight grip which pulled him to the right, face to the wall. So secured, he inched along what he knew must be the face of a ravine, his toes on the small ledge midway between lip and foot. Somehow the three men reached ground level, their diagonal course of descent putting some distance between them and the camp. In spite of the cold of the night, Drew was met with sweat as they threaded through heady sagebrush. Now came the scent of horses, the sound of hoof stamped impatiently on gravel. "Trinfan, Topman here? See." At Hilario's hissed assent, a figure detached itself from the utter black of the bushes and moved forward into the silver moonlight. "You got him?" "I'm here." "If that's what you mean," Drew answered for himself. "And you'll be gone soon," the gambler replied. "But there's one thing I have to know, Kirby. Were you telling the truth to Rennie? Do you believe Johnny took your papers?" What that had to do with the matter at hand, Drew wondered, but from the urgency of the demand, he knew it did mean a great deal to Topman. "Yes, I'm sure, but I can't prove it. Unless I find them with him, he may have destroyed them already." Drew put into words the black foreboding which had ridden him for days. "Why? What do they mean to him?" Evasions and lies had gotten him into this mess. Now he would see what the stark truth would do. "Because there's 2 letters, proof that I'm Drew Rennie." "Rennie?" Topman repeated. In the light, Drew could not see his expression, but his voice was that of complete, baffled man. "Rennie?" "I'm Hunt Rennie's son." There, he said it. Nothing startling happened. Well, what had he expected? A clap of thunder, a bolt of lightning, sudden appearance of cavalry patrol on the nearest hilltop? "So that's it," Topman said slowly. "And Shannon suspected. But why the mystery?" Drew took the questions in turn. "Shannon was at the Jacks when I met Ance. I thought he was unconscious, but he probably wasn't. Aunts call me by my right name. As for my father, he doesn't know I'm alive. He was told I died at birth along with my mother. They told me he was killed in the Mexican War before I was born. It was all because of an old family feud. Too long story to tell now. I've only known for about a year I had a father here in Arizona, but to make a claim on him after all them years, maybe you don't understand why I didn't want to. He was telling it badly, but he'd been a fool about this from the start. Understand? Yes, I think I can. There's a certain strain of bull-headed independence common to the Rennies. I've met it head-on several times myself. And your choice, your own to make. But this, yes, it is just the move Shannon would make given suspicion to push him into action. And now it may be pushing him even farther. Drew was a little bewildered by Topman's ready acceptance of his story without any proof, but the tone of his last remark got his full attention. What do you mean, what happened now? I've had my suspicions, pretty nasty ones for some time, but I had your trouble, no proof. In the last 3 days, I've picked up and sorted out a few very wild cards, and now they're making a pat hand. Kitchell has had his contact hereabouts, all right, just as Bayless has always insisted. You can't mean Shannon. Johnny Shannon. And if he's doing what I think he is, Topman paused. Well, he continued. He had changed the subject. Last night I rode up from the range, said that Kitchell made a raid, almost a clean sweep. Among the other stock he gathered up was that prize stud of yours. Shiloh! And Shannon had the horse papers. The Kentuckian was thinking fast now. Yes, if Shannon's riding with Kitchell now, he can prove ownership of that stud and sell him anywhere without trouble. Topman could have been riding Drew's mind, but that's not as important as something else. Hunt went hell-bent for leather out of here. He'll gather up that private army of his and try to trail the riders. Maybe Kitchell will ride south, or maybe he'll head directly back into Apache country. Either way, that trail's going to be easy for anyone after him as walking barefoot through a good roaring fire. Hunt still had his blind faith in Johnny. I was hoping you could help break that. That why you got me out of the camp, Drew asked. Partly. Hunt told me what you said about Johnny taking your papers. I had you sized up as being too smart to make a claim like that unless you really believed it. And I thought maybe you could prove it, given a chance. If you can't get to Hunt now, tell him the truth before Johnny rigs something of a double-cross. Would he believe me any more than he did when I accused Shannon? Drew asked bleakly. I'll head south, all right. Nobody's going to lift Shiloh and get away with it. Not as long as I'm able to fork a saddle and push. But if you're counting on my being able to influence my father, he stumbled over the words awkwardly. Don't. I'm counting on nothing, Topman returned. Just hoping now. For a long time we've heard about Johnny Shan being a young hothead who found it hard to settle down after the war. I think there are two Johnnies, and we're just beginning to know the real one. You could be his prime target now. Fair of you to point that out. Drew thought that at last he had found a real motive for Topman's services. I'm likely to be bait. Ain't that the truth of it? If you are, the trap is going to be there. But now, get away from here. Teodoro will ride with you as guide. And the army after me. That's it. Drew had mounted. That's what you want, isn't it? Me to pull the troops south, hunting down an escaped horse thief they might slam into Kitchell. What a trick. Topman had planned it without asking Drew's support, but it called for enough audacity, luck, and nerve to be appealing. During the war, the Kentuckian had seen such schemes win out time and time again. Why ain't Bayless already riding, he asked. Hasn't he heard about the raid? He's been heard to say a man can raid his own stock as a cover-up. What's wrong with him? Is he deaf, dumb, and blind? No, just prejudiced and ridden by envy until he's not able to think straight anymore, but he'll track you and follow you quick enough. He sure will, all right. We ride. They did, Drew depending on the younger Trinfan's guidance, and while Teodoro was meandering trail, It was not one which a determined pursuer could have too much trouble following. Come sun-up, or whenever the sentry discovered he was guarding a straw prisoner, once when they pulled up to breathe their horses, dismounting to loose cinches and cool the backs of their mounts, Drew indulged his curiosity further. "How come you knew just where to make that hole to let me out?" Teodoro laughed. "That was easy, senor. That was the Garza Ranchero. Only 6 months has the army been there. Many times we have camped within its walls, when we brought in the best of the wild catch for sale. I know those buildings very well. When Senor Topman tells my father what must be done, we could plan well and quickly. I have heard what you said, Senor Topman, that you are son of Don Cazar. Why did he not know of this? Why have you never lived here with him?" "He didn't know I was alive, and I didn't know that he was. My grandfather, my mother's father, he hated Don Cazar very much, because of a duel and other things. So my father took my mother away secretly, brought her to Texas when they were both very young. Then Don Cazar went out to war, and the news came that he had been killed. My grandfather went to Texas and took my mother home with him. She died a few months later when I was born. It was only after my grandfather died 2 years ago that letters from my father were found among his private papers. These I discovered when I came home from the war, learning that my father was alive and here in Arizona. Only we were strangers. I did not know whether he would like me for a son, or whether I wanted a stranger for a father. So, when I came here, I took the name of my compadre, my friend from the war, Ance Kirby. I wanted to know my father before I made my claims." "And Senor Juanito, for this he will hate you?" "Because I did not tell who I was at the start," Drew asked. "No, because you're truly Don Cazar's son. Always Don Cazar. He treated Senor Juanito as son, but I do not think that was enough. Senor Juanito is one who must have everything, all. Even when he was a boy, he was like that. Bartolome Rivas, he braids beautiful ropes, and he made one for Juanito. Always I wanted a rope like that. I'd watch Juanito use it and wish. Then once he spent a Christmas at the stronghold. It was after my father was hurt, and Don Cazar had us stay there so he could tend my father's wounds. Had he been with us when the wild ones stampeded, my father would not walk crooked, but we got him back to the ranch too late. But that is not what I would say. It was Christmas, and Don Cazar gave to me a rope like that of Juanito, a fine rope, which felt as if it were part of a man's own arm when he swung it. 2 days later, that rope, it was gone. Never did I find it. But I knew I'd seen Juanito watching me when I tried that fine rope, and I knew his thoughts. No one must have a rope as good as his. Not long after that, he ran away to join the army, but really that was because of Don Cazar caught him beating one of the Indios. Only that is not generally known. The Indio was being taught by Don Cazar to have charge of the grain storage, and Juanito thought the Indios are as dirt, should have no place among the Anglos. Senior, Juanito, would hate with a black hate anyone who had a right to be a son of the stronghold, a better right than he could claim. He must always be on top, at the head. Sometimes it would seem that he would, if he could, push aside Don Cazar himself. Now I think we should ride again." By dawn, Drew had no idea where they were, except that they pushed south. Whether they were now on the range, he did not know. And now, in the immensity of this hostile country, they could fulfill Topham's hopes and lead the troop patrol to Rennie's posse. Was something the Kentuckian did not even try and answer. The border lay south. If Kitchell had made such a sweeping raid, he would be certain to run the animals in that direction. For the outlaw was fully aware of Rennie's reputation and temper, and I knew that Don Cazar would trail him with set determination.